Little Ham says it's time to rock and roll.
Bring the noise.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Xmas Podcast. My name is Desi, and tonight, so far, I am glad to say I have been joined by our resident tactician in the suburbs, Hector Bandido. Good evening, Hector.
Evening, everyone.
Thanks for joining. And while we await the potential visit of Ralph Mull from Stoke, I am very honoured and glad to say that we have a very special Christmas treat for everyone. And I'm not putting any pressure on you at all, but we have Matthew from the Hail History. Welcome, Matthew. Welcome to the Xmas Podcast.
Thanks very much. I have to say, with that build-up, I think people are going to be more disappointed with me than they were after the game on Sunday.
Well, before you get to talk about disappointments, I've just got one quick note that I should have said a minute ago. Bear with me, and that is I've got hello to Hector here, and this is from a man at Celtic Park, Hector, a friend of the site, a good friend of the site. James asks, why is Hector so bloody nice these days? Where have all the rants gone?
Oh, I know where this one's going. I know where this one's going, Desi. You're setting me right up, aren't you? You're putting the ball on the goal line for a tap-in.
Don't you worry, James.
A big bloater at the back end. Oh,
and the work of the song, there may be trouble ahead as well as rants. But I'm just letting you know, Hector, your public have been asking
James, you're in for a treat tonight, James. Don't worry about it.
James sits right behind me at Celtic Park, and he did ask, where have all the rants gone? So as I said, folks, Merry Christmas, one and all. Welcome to the Humbug CSC podcast, which it could turn out to be tonight. But as I say, we have Matthew from the Hail History here tonight. So Matthew, for anyone out there who does not know, please give us a wee 5 minutes on yourself and your Celtic interests and current goings on, please.
Excellent. Well, I think, like most people, I'm currently a bit of a disgruntled Celtic supporter. But if we avoid that just now, which we'll no doubt get into later. My name's Matthew Marr. This year, I've been involved in quite a lot of Celtic history stuff, but this year I published my first book, all about the Celtic's first ever league title, which was 130 years ago this year, the 1892-93 season. That was published by the Celtic Star, and it's available on the Celtic Star website, and it's also available in the Celtic shop, which was really, when I wrote the book, my sort of burning ambition to get a good looking book and get it in the Celtic shop. That was really the big thing that drove me. But I've been involved in quite a lot of different Celtic history things. I write for various different publications, not just the Celtic Star, but the Celtic blog, the Shamrock fanzine, and things along those lines. And in the last few months, I've started running quite a lot of Celtic history walking tours, which have proven to be really, really popular. We've done some in the Celtic Park area, looking at, it firstly started telling the story of Celtic's first league title. But it's since broadened out. I've done a tour looking at the sort of the history of Celtic Park, in fact, Celtic Parks, because obviously, you've got the original park that was just next to the current ground. And in the last few weeks, I've started doing sort of match day walking tours. So going from leaving from near George Square, walking up to the ground on the day of the game, stopping at a few different places, a couple of pubs as well, to give that added attraction. And it's all been about just giving people the opportunity to learn about the club's history. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but, we sing it for the history. So actually, one of the best ways to help people find that out is to actually give them the chance to hear the stories and all the rest of it. So been doing that for a while. Something I personally enjoy. Not something that costs any money. The only thing I do ask if people come, if they feel they can, that I encourage them to make a donation to the Celtic Foundation, but there's no charges at all to actually come along. It's just really hopefully a chance for people to enjoy themselves, come and hear a bit about the club, especially some stories that people might not realise, including about places. So that's really been the story of me. Next year, hope to have the second book come out next year, playing about with a couple of ideas. I'm pretty much finished the research for two. I basically have to decide which of them I'm going to actually get around to properly writing. But the aim would be probably this time next year we'll have the next history book out, and I've got some other tours planned as well, including some city centre ones. Next June will be 135 years since we first had a trophy session, since we first won a trophy. And the first ever trophy awards we had was in Glasgow City Centre in June 1889. So planning to do something about that, but looking at not just the history of that, but also just some wider connections that Celtic have got to the city centre as well. So plenty of stuff going on. And as I say, if people are interested, if they follow me on Hail Hail History on X or Twitter or whatever we call it, but I also usually post on things like the Huddle Board and all these other different sites to give people information. So if people are interested, they're very welcome.
Brilliant.
Can I just ask you a question? Thanks for that. I think I dropped you a message maybe a few months ago when we first mooted it.
Mm-hmm.
Coming on the tour, but my youngest boy was just under the age of 18 at the time, and I thought, well, it'd be great. It was the pub aspect. So now he's 18. We'll look to go on the one next year. But just for those listening, the one you did recently, a few months ago, where did you sort of go to regards heading down towards Celtic Park? What sort of places of interest did you visit? And obviously one or two places for a wee drink or two.
Yeah, so the sort of point of the tour was to pick up some sites that people may or may not know exist. So as I say, we started in the city centre, and then as we moved out to the ground, you're going to places that are part of it, part of the club's history, but you're also trying to tell a bit of, especially the early history, especially sort of looking at in the first few years after the club was formed. So there's various sites that you can visit en route. In terms of the city centre, the very first place we go to, or the very first place we pass, is, well, it's not there anymore, but it was the Bank, which was Willie Mailey's restaurant. We then actually passed the W.H. Smith that people may or may not know, that's on Argyle Street. But that building, which is the Stag's Head building, is actually an Alexander Greek Thompson building. But that, again, is one of the sites that has a sort of an unknown connection in terms of trophies. And then basically, as we walk up to the ground, we go to various other sites. So the most obvious one we stop at is, of course, St Mary's Church in the Carlton. But we go to one of the reasons we stop at some of the pubs that we do is that if you can go back, we're going back about 100 and odd years now, but they were owned by Celtic supporters. Sorry, not Celtic supporters. They were owned by Celtic players. A good example, Mick Dunbar, who was one of the club's early players, a director as well of the club. So there's lots of different sites like that that all tell various parts of Celtic's early history, and ultimately we basically finish at Celtic Park in time for the game. So really enjoyed it. I've done a couple of them now, and it was just a really great reception that I got from the people that were on it.
Sounds really good. I was just going to ask, in terms of ex-Celtic players and board members, are any of these establishments in the past owned by anyone with the surname of Law at all? way back in the day? Or Desmond? Anything way back then? No?
Well, they could have been a shadow partner, I suppose, but to the best of my knowledge, they've not been part of it. But no, it's great. It's really good because you can get there's some really funny stories that you can get connected to. One of the places, when we get right up to Celtic Park, when we get just to the edge of Janefield Cemetery, just next to Society Street, which is just, if people know where that is, but just next to that, it's actually Cole Hill Street. For example, that was a pub that was at one point owned by Sandy McMahon, who was in the 1890s. You're probably talking the Kyogo of his day, really the sort of the striker hero, but also was then taken over by Jimmy McMenemy, who was obviously another legendary Celtic player, the man that scored most consecutive seasons for Celtic in the club's history. So, but you can get the sort of just the factual thing of going to see these places. But you also get the funny stories that connected to it. There's a great story about Sandy McMahon, the year Celtic first won the league, which involves kidnapping, and it's how his transfer to Celtic came about, or rather, how his transfer from Celtic didn't come about. It's really funny if you do research from sports and football in those days. The word kidnapping comes up all the time. It's a really common thing because before the days of professionalism or official professionalism, you couldn't really get people to sign for you. And one of the main ways you got them to sign for you was you made them play for you, because that tied them to you for a period. So it wasn't unknown if you got somebody to agree to sign for you, you'd basically hide them away for a few days until you could get them to play a game, just so that no one else could come along and steal them from you. And that's exactly what happened. So Sandy McMahon, playing for Celtic, very, very popular. Nottingham Forest really wanted to sign him. So the summer of 1892, he disappears off to Nottingham, along with Neil McCallum, who was, of course, the man that scored Celtic's first ever goal. And basically Forest hide him because they're worried that the Celtic committee are going to find him, they're going to somehow get him to come home. And it's a bit like something out of John le Carré novel, what happened. You know, we basically send out different hunting parties looking for him. There's a very strong suggestion that Notts County, who don't want him to sign for Forest, are giving us information about where they think he's hiding. We eventually find him. They get into a fight with Neil McCallum because Neil McCallum says, he's not going with you. He's not going back to Glasgow. And he's told he is. In fact, Neil McCallum actually says, we're not coming back to Glasgow. And Neil McCallum's told, you weren't asked. They persuade Sandy McMahon. A lot of there's various accounts, but probably Sandy McMahon's brother was one of the ones that went to look for him. They persuade him to come with him. They jump into a taxi, not a taxi now, you know, but literally a horse and cart. And as it goes to go away, Neil McCallum threatens the driver, basically makes it no, you know, we'll let it be known in the local area that you've been going round helping, you know, our players escape. So the taxi driver decides this is too much hassle, tells them to get off. They run for it. They eventually get away and they find a pub to hide in, but they're still no safe. So the next day, they basically manage to make it to Manchester and they're sneaking round corners like they're in a spy movie, just in case there's any of the Forest committee waiting for them at the station to get to Glasgow. They make it. They get on the train, no, all is well, but they're still really worried that there's going to be somebody waiting for them in Glasgow. So they jump off a stop early at Eglinton Street rather than in the city centre. And it's just like, there's just so many weird and really funny stories if you go back. That's from a personal level why I really enjoyed doing a lot of the research.
Sorry, I couldn't stop laughing there. I was visualising. Thanks for that. And it's so fascinating. I couldn't help it. My mind was running away there, thinking back to Kieran Tierney getting sold to Arsenal. And Tierney saying to his Celtic board, no, I want to stay in Glasgow. I'm not interested. And it's a role reversal of Law and Co. forcing them, kidnapping them, taking them down to London. And
forcing the taxi driver.
Signs the contract.
Well, that's what, because I also had a note there for you, Matthew, to say the books that are in the Celtic Superstore, has Mr. Lawwell signed them for all the public?
Aye, but they cost more. So, you know, you'd be better. No, they are in the shop. It's great. I keep going into the shop and I keep people, our friends and family that are in the shops keep going in and saying, oh, there's the book. I keep encouraging them. I mean, I don't know if I want Celtic to hear this, but I keep encouraging them to move them. If they're not in a prominent enough spot, you know, to move them up a shelf or something, just to make sure they're getting that bit of publicity. But it is, do you know what it is? You can see, all jokes aside, it's really, it is actually quite exciting because, I mean, we're all of a certain age. I know you were saying I'm the youngest, but even I'm in my mid-40s, you know, and youngster. I can remember, you know, you remember back to the days of the Kerrydale shop, you know, when you know, just that tiny, it's not even we to call it a shop. And over the years, you can think of going into all the different Celtic shops there's been, and actually see to go into a Celtic shop and see something that you've made yourself. It's really, it's absolutely brilliant. It was just really something that I was determined to do, and I've definitely got the bug for it now. So there'll be another one along soon enough.
Fantastic. You're lucky Ralph isn't on, or else he'd be telling you the story of meeting Bertie Auld in the Superstore one time when he came up for Stoke and it cost him 130 quid because Bertie just kept putting stuff in his trolley kind of thing. Oh, here, son, you want this, you want that. Clearly he was on commission by the Celtic Superstore and he was just putting stuff in the basket. So that's great. I just had one wee note there, and this might sound silly, but is there any misapprehensions regarding Celtic history that you discovered? That come to mind.
I don't know so much about misapprehensions. I think one of the interesting things, and it actually, I suppose it's relevant in what we've been talking about in recent times off the park in Celtic, because obviously there's been a lot of discussion in the last wee while about sort of the issue of politics in Celtic and, you know, the club's establishment. And I think the more you look at the early history of the club, I think the more you see, or my opinion would be, and as in all history things, you know, people won't completely agree with this, but it's the split that exists. I think there's no question that Celtic was formed in the first instance for charitable purposes. The question is, though, how long that genuinely lasts. And not only that, the question of the extent to which the charity was the driving force for everyone. Clearly, for the likes of Brother Walfrid, charity was what lay behind it. But it's quite interesting when you look at the sorts of people that were involved, some of the events that took place, that allow you to raise questions about what actually motivated. Charity is part of it. Irish politics to some extent, and I think there can be different parts of Irish politics. There's clearly many people who were involved in the club at the start who were Irish nationalists. There's others who weren't really so much nationalists, certainly not in the sense we might think now, but were instead very much interested in the idea of how to promote and enhance the Irish community within Scotland itself. And then if we're being honest, there's probably a group of people who from the start saw a business opportunity, you know. I mean, Celtic's rise is absolutely meteoric. You know, the first games played in May 1888. The first competitive game is August 1888. And by October of that year, September, there's already newspapers in Scotland that constantly refer to the already famous Celtic. And they talk about, you know, this amazing club. And that was sort of unheard of. You know, Irish clubs getting formed. Irish clubs were 10 a penny in Scotland at that point. There are so many Hibs and Shamrocks and Erin's and Emmets and so many other names. And yet Celtic were the one that obviously didn't just stick, but really right from the start, all went straight to the top of the pile. And I think a lot of that lies behind split motivations, which is probably a reasonable way to look at it. So I think the more you look at the history of the club, the more you see that whilst charity is absolutely part of it, that there's a much wider story to be told that, you know, that many people have. I mean, it's not even a new thing. Probably the most famous Celtic authors, Celtic historians, are Pat Woods and Tom Campbell, you know, and people will obviously know, you know, the story of the Glory and the Dream. But, you know, they talk about in the Glory and the Dream the idea of, from the very, very start, you can really talk about the battle for Celtic's soul, because although the club may be, not maybe, but is at the start all about charity, very, very soon you begin to see the splits and the fractures that exist, even with people setting up rival clubs within a few months. You know, like James Quillen was one of the sort of club's, you know, early drivers, and he'd helped set up Glasgow Hibs really within just a few months of us playing. So I think you look at stuff like that and it's quite interesting. But I think just in general, you know, I spend my day as, you know, teaching history, and I think what you learn is it's often tempting to think, well, I know that, so everyone must know that. But actually, if you don't keep telling history over and over again, it is very easy to forget the early things. And so for us, you know, going back to the early days, understanding where the club comes from, but also where a lot of the modern success in the very, very distant past was built on, is really interesting.
That was so genuinely fascinating for me. I tongue-in-cheek mentioned Kieran Tierney a few minutes ago, and that brought me round to the story. And I'm going to ask you, if it's okay, because you're the expert in this, about who I see as our most famous and best ever Celtic, James Edward McGrory. And obviously the transfer to Arsenal that the Celtic board tried to force through on more than one occasion. But McGrory, both on the way to Lourdes in France and the way back, declined, and for it he paid a bit of a punishment in terms of getting his wages deducted. Would you mind for those who don't know, just giving a little bit more behind that story with Willie Maley, I think it was, taking Jimmy at the end of the season on the way to Lourdes and they stopped off in London? Do you mind filling in the blanks with that one?
Yeah, I mean, you've told the gist of the story. I mean, in very, very simple terms, I think, and maybe, I suppose people are going to say when I say this, you know, some things never change, but I think Celtic saw a financial opportunity. You know, Jimmy McGrory was, you know, I think as well, we sometimes forget. I mean, I know Kieran Tierney obviously went to Arsenal in recent years, but Scottish football was on much more of an even par, you know, with English football. You know, if we're going back to the, you know, the sort of the post World War I period, and you know, Celtic really, you know, if you were a great player at Celtic, there was a recognition that you were somebody that could easily play down south in a way that perhaps there's much more of a chauvinism about now that, many English people would think otherwise. And I think, quite frankly, Celtic saw a big opportunity. There was then, as now, more money in England than there was in Scotland.
And the fee at the time, you keep me right here. This is a bit that just because we obviously try and bring it into modern day thinking, which was quite difficult. I think the fee at the time was reputed to be about £10,000, which would have been a world, not just a world record transfer fee. And that's the bit I try to comprehend. A world record transfer fee for Jimmy McGrory.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. I mean, if you could, I mean, I don't know the exact modern day thing, but you would be talking the equivalent of tens of millions of pounds in the modern climate. It would have been an absolutely massive transfer if he'd gone. And clearly, perhaps then as now, but many on the board saw this as a big opportunity. I think there was perhaps this idea, we'll sell this guy, it will obviously make the club more money, we can use it to buy players, all the things I suppose you get told now. And of course, McGrory decided that this wasn't really the life that he wanted. He wasn't really persuaded. I'm sure people know the famous quote that, McGrory of the Celtic sounds much better than McGrory of the Arsenal. But that's the quote that's always been attributed to McGrory himself.
But they tried to do it twice, didn't they? On the way down the train to London, I don't know if it's one of the fancy hotels there, the Arsenal directors came in to the room where Willie Maley had primed Jimmy McGrory to sit and talk to him. Oh, fancy meeting you guys here. Oh, by the way, Arsenal, who were the champions of England, like 2 or 3 seasons in the trot at the time, they were the biggest team in England. And McGrory said, thank you, very, very nice, and declined. Then off the set, I think, wasn't it down to get the ferry over to Calais, then down to Lourdes, and then the way back, they pretty much followed the same journey in reverse, didn't they? And lo and behold, the night in London, who appears again? But the same Arsenal board of directors, for the second time, trying to buy McGrory. And this is a bit that fascinates me. McGrory being surrounded by these guys, it couldn't have been easy. These powerful men offering a world record transfer fee, but I'd imagine for him, life-changing beyond belief money. But his heart and mind was set in the Garngad where he was from, and I think he'd moved to Denniston. He'd moved up the world, go over to Denniston because he's easier to get to Celtic Park. But the bit that fascinates me as well, when he said no and Maley and the board refused to talk to him, was did they not cut his wages?
There's stories about, that he ended up costing him money. I mean, I suppose what it is, I mean, I ran a poll a while ago about, who should get the next statue at Celtic Park. And for me, for me, it should be McGrory. The only other one you can potentially argue with is Maley. But for me, Jimmy McGrory should absolutely be the next statue at Celtic Park for this exact reason. It's not just the fact that he was clearly an absolutely remarkable player. It's the fact he was genuinely so committed to the club. As you say, was prepared to not just turn down what, as you say, must have been, by the standards of the time, an absolutely massive amount of money, genuinely life-changing. And instead insist, I'm going to stay here in spite of all the pressure that you're going to put me under. And I think you make a valid point about, Jimmy McGrory, a guy from the Garngad, but would be very aware, not coming from money, not coming, from this background of wealth or power, suddenly to be surrounded by people that were. Because that's fundamentally, the people that ran football clubs, I suppose then as now, they weren't generally, or they weren't often, so I suppose sometimes there might have been certain self-made people, but these were sort of influential people, rich, well used to dealing with politicians, bankers and all the rest of it. So if McGrory is willing twice to anger Celtic, to anger Arsenal, to refuse to give it pressure because he believed this was where he belonged, to me it's just yet more evidence that, he really is, to me, the one that should have the next statue. Just a phenomenal player and a phenomenal figure in the club's history.
It's interesting how, sorry, Desi, but
that's fine.
Probably your own things. What fascinates me about McGrory, and I don't want to just keep it to this, but he's clearly, to say, one of my all-time heroes, because I'd read his book many years ago, and it fascinated me, and it stuck with me ever since, is why the club haven't done more for a man who's not just Celtic's record goal scorer in the season, not just Celtic's record goal scorer ever, not just Britain's record goal scorer. He was a Celtic manager. He then went on after that to run the Celtic pool. So he must have gave up, we talk 40, 50 years of his life to Celtic. He's probably the greatest ever Celt, in many people's considered opinion. and why the club haven't done anything for him. Any thoughts on that?
I don't know. I think I'm going to say something, right? I'd say something that's
he's jumping off the fence.
I'm going to say something that's slightly sacrilege here. The club, the Lisbon Lions, are not quite rightly the pinnacle of Celtic. You know, it's the club's greatest manager. We've got it's the club's greatest ever achievement, and we should never ever forget it. I also think at times we have to not make the club about one single event. You know, we've got 135 years of history in terms of, you know, from our first game to now, well, more than 135 years in terms of from our first game to now. And if you look, you know, what have we got at Celtic Park? We've got the Lisbon Lions stand, we've got the Jock Stein stand, we've got a Billy McNeil statue, we've got a Jock Stein statue, we've got a Jimmy Johnson statue, and these are great. I would not for a million years think we should, you know, forget these things or anything like that. But I do think we have to remember that the club's history is so much more than just Lisbon. Utterly important though Lisbon was. And to me, I think you're absolutely right. I would very much like to see more done on, you know, a lot of the, you know, the earlier part of the club's story. You know, I think just now, in a very simplistic sense, a lot of people's knowledge, if we're being completely honest, a lot of people's knowledge of the history of the club is Brother Walfred, and then decades pass, and, you know, we get to the 1960s. And I think it would be fantastic if the club could do more. For years, there's been chat about a club, you know, like museum and things like that. And I mean, it is worth noting there is a lot the club already does. You know, I mean, you've got tours that take place, history tours at Celtic Park, which are brilliant, which do look at, you know, a lot of the early history going back to, you know, to times like the 30s, the turn of the 20th century. So the club does do things, but I think if you're really going to emphasise it, to me, a symbol of it, of which Jimmy McGrory would be a brilliant one as a statue, would be a really important thing. And then in the long run, I don't think there's any question that what we really need to see, I think possibly it will come if we ever get a redevelopment at the main stand, but it's some sort of proper museum. Because, I mean, I'm sure like many of you, you know, when I go abroad, I've gone to lots of different clubs, and I've visited the stadiums, and you get a real mixture of tours. You know, some tours are fantastic. The Nou Camp tour is really excellent. The Amsterdam Arena for Ajax is a really great tour as well. Actually, I know they're getting a new stadium, but the San Siro is really, really underwhelming from a tour perspective. It wasn't the best tour I'd ever been on. But to me, Celtic should be learning from them, and perhaps we don't have the space for it. The main stand is clearly in big need of an upgrade at some point. But if there is any change, that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see a museum, and I'd like to see, absolutely, let's tell the story of the Lisbon Lions in that era, because it's crucial, it's central to the club's story. But let's also have a look at some of the earlier parts and really bring out people's knowledge of them.
Yeah,
Fascinating stuff.
We could be here all night, and we don't even need to talk about anything current, because it's brilliant.
Can we do that?
I have one question, Matthew. One question I would be willing to bet at least a fiver on something. You may have been asked this before, but do we actually know why it's pronounced Celtic rather than Keltic?
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things is, to his dying day, apparently Brother Walfred never referred to it as anything other than Keltic. Brother Walfred wanted it to be called Keltic. Brother Walfred kept calling it Keltic, and literally until it was during World War I when Brother Walfred died. So until that point, he just wouldn't call it Celtic. It was always the Keltic Football Club. That was what he wanted to be called. I think it's purely a pronunciation thing. I mean, one of the interesting things that people tend to forget is, you know, where do you go if you want to see films? You go to the cinema. But early cinemas were often called kinemas, because of the origin of the words kinetic photography, moving pictures. And over time, kinema, and you can still see, I mean, all around Scotland, there are still older buildings at the start that have literally got a K. I mean, they literally have a K at the start of it. And I think it's simply it's like anything else. Language never stays the same. People pronounce it, people begin to change slightly the tone and meaning of things. And over time, and that's really what happened with Celtic. So, you know, Celtic was chosen, or Keltic, if you're Brother Walfred. As people pronounce it, you begin, I suppose you forget as well, I think if Celtic had been formed in the days of like TV and radio, possibly Keltic would have stood. But I think what you instead have is Brother Walfred might use the name Keltic, but people don't hear that. The best you can do is you can read about it, and then other people start saying, oh, there's a new Irish team that's been formed. And if they pronounce it Celtic, you begin to lose sort of control of the word. And very, very quickly, it was just Celtic. And so despite Brother Walfred's protests, you can't really, it was a bit like a tsunami. Once the word had spread and people started using it in a certain way, it's very difficult to roll that back. As I say, maybe
you just got me thinking about the Glenn Daly song, the Celtic song. He'll heal the Celts are here. Is that no better? Here we go.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah, the Celts might well be, but then it's like we always joke about, if you go back to the early club, imagine we had Stripey the Huddle Hounds, and come on the Stripes and all the rest of it. It's weird because that is, again, if you go back to newspapers up to 1903, Celtic are quite commonly referred to in newspapers the Stripes. The green stripes are in town and that type of thing. So I think, it's like anything else. Nothing tends to stay the same, forever. But in Brother Walfred's case, it didn't stay the same at all, sadly, for him.
Right, and again, for people listening, I've got a full agenda in front of me, and I don't think we're going to get anywhere near half yet, and I mean that in a good way. But I'm still obsessed with this Celtics versus Celtics. So is it only in sport that they refer to teams as in Celtic or Celtics, and is that due to Celtic, that pronunciation worldwide?
Basketball as well.
That's what I'm saying, but worldwide, even like Staley big Celtic, and there's Bloemfontein Celtic, isn't there? And I'm just wondering, is that the Celtic influence?
The honest answer is I don't know.
Next time you go on, find out, please, Matthew, because you really expect more from our historical experts.
Some of the Celtics are definitely based on Celtic. I mean, again, there's so many Irish clubs in Scotland in the late 1800s, and what you see is in the 1890s, once Glasgow Celtic have really established themselves, you see a real surge in Celtic spreading up all around Scotland. Almost anywhere in Scotland that had any sort of Irish community had a Celtic, just a sort of local Celtic, and some of them had more than one. So it definitely spreads there. I think clubs like Stalybridge Celtic and all this, Stalybridge Celtic, then I think you're definitely getting the Celtic influence from there. But then I suppose you can start to say the same about strips. I mean, there's so many clubs in the world where, the strip that they have, whether it's hoops or stripes, the origin of that comes back to Celtic. In some cases, it's because we gave them strips. In other cases, it's because, fans of ours had some sort of connection to the club. Real Betis is a good example. They wear stripes. One of the theories is that there was, a Celtic supporter who was involved with the club who was given a gift of strips by Celtic, which influenced that. Buckie Thistle, that we're obviously going to be playing in the Scottish Cup next month, was another one. You've got, Cameron Carter Vickers' old team, Catholic United, which again they wear green and white hoops because we sent them a set of strips decades ago now, and they've just established it. So I don't think there's any question that Celtic's influence has gone far and wide around the world. Whether it affects all Celtic sporting names, including Boston, I'd be lying if I said I knew that.
We'll assume so for now anyway. If anyone wants to write in or wants to contact Matthew at Hail History and updates, that would be appreciated. So again, thanks very much, Matthew. Hopefully everyone enjoyed that, and we'll come back to a few items in a set later on. But for now, we are looking at the present. But ideally, the question is, tonight, I think we're going to ask, is it a case of potentially history repeating? So it's very apt to have Matthew on. So Hector, you have been, as I said, James did ask what has happened to Hector's rants. And on our WhatsApp and on recent podcasts, you have been very mild of nature. I think it's really your grandson being born. You've been very mild. Your perspectives have totally changed. But the old Hector returned on Sunday. I have not heard you being so angry on our WhatsApp group in such a long time. Was that the straw that finally broke Hector's back? Sunday's non-performance.
I don't think I was by any means alone. and being angry.
I will back up on that in a second, but carry on.
On Sunday, Desi. I mean, it was interesting that the week or so before at McDiarmid Park, first half, first 10 minutes, we started okay, a couple of chances, then we were rubbish. But even the first half at McDiarmid Park was nowhere near as poor as the second half at Rugby Park. I think what was so frustrating about it was in the first half, I thought we played some good football at times. In the first half, I thought we scored 2 or 3 goals, which is always a hard place for us to go, probably apart from last season, that is. But we zipped it about well, could have took a couple of more chances. It just from the minute the second half kicked off, pretty much until, 8 minutes of added time, the 98th minute.
Yeah.
Well, Monarch absolutely battered us for an entire half of football. Now, you expect teams to get spells who their limited budget, limited quality of players compared to us, because we're the first to mention that when it comes to playing teams with bigger budgets in Europe, for example, with better players. I can't remember the last time a team, the Kilmarnock's budget, etc., dominated us for an entire half of football. We were like a team caught like a rabbit in the headlights. We didn't quite know what to do. And all they did, but they went man for man and just squeezed up in their defence. That's what they did. So for us at our level, that shouldn't have been difficult to play out of that, right? Leaving almost man v man against us at the back. The problem was we just bottled it. I thought what was really frustrating, we could get through the whole, not quite the whole team, but there's probably some good examples to share. I felt that Palmer, Mikey Johnson were non-existent. Matt O'Reilly, who in possession of the ball is one of our better players this season, I don't think there's any debate about that. Matt O'Reilly was turning his back on challenges throughout the second half. And we're not saying, like back in our heyday, put the boot in and get right through somebody. We're saying go touch tight and close down space and make it difficult. He was turning his back on things. Nat Phillips, probably the least said about him the better, but he just looks like a cart horse. And don't get me started in Greg Taylor. I despair when people say Taylor's, he's going through a rough. No, he's not. When the team's winning, he can get by. When the team's up against it, he's targeted almost all the time for a number of factors, 2 of which is his lack of physical presence, i.e. height, and also lack of pace. And he gets targeted almost all the time. And again, the goals come down his side. I don't know how many this year it's come down his side. So there were so many things wrong. And last but not least, we know we've had issues this season in terms of key players. If we go back and talk about what we're really missing. So Hatate, not in the team. We lack that bit of magic through the middle of the pitch. We've had this discussion before. Maeda, hopefully people now who still want to whinge about the guy will now understand what he brings to his team in terms of work ethic, in terms of pace, being dynamic, covering the ground of 2 or 3 players, and sitting in front of Taylor defensively.
Yep.
Abada's this bit of an enigma, as we know, we've spoken many times before, whereas a simple cross he seems to struggle with so often. But yet, the amount of crucial goals that guy scored over the past 2 seasons, we've not had this season, and we've not replaced Jota. So there's 4 of our best, most creative players from the end of last season we've not got in. So lack of goal threat going forward. But my final point, and I'm quite calm with my rant, because the bigger rant's are way above the team and the manager. But the manager, why did he not change the system? Why did he not go 3-5-2 or try and tweak it? So we played Atletico Madrid in the Champions League, and it was we got it to 2 each, and they got man sent off. And he brought on Phillips and actually went 3-5-2. Put a bit of control back in the game. When it was so clear that we're under so much pressure for so long, why not change it to a 3-5-2? Why not? He just kept the exact same shape. All he did was he took Awata off and put Kalmak back into that position there. But he left it man for man. Another centre back in, a spare man there, trying to gain some control. And he did nothing. And that was frustrating. So all of that combined together, it was a dreadful, dreadful second half.
Yeah, just to confirm, level-headed he'd been, Matthew, recently. Hector writes on the WhatsApp at 16:48 on Sunday. And Taylor's fucking shite. If anyone dares defend that useless, slow, weak, greeting-faced wee cunt again, I'm going to go mental. So that was, to be fair, you only used one exclamation mark.
That was some other idiot.
That was you. Right, so that's Hector's thoughts, Matthew. I'll just give you the first paragraph of Monty's thoughts. Monty can't be here tonight. He's doing his international businessman travelling. But he did put a big rant on our WhatsApp. He's usually, just to let Matthew and anyone who's not familiar, Monty's usually level-headed. I love Brendan. The board are doing a great financial job, but they could do more, etc. He's usually quite level-headed. The first paragraph, Matthew, for your consideration from Monty. I said it a few weeks back. We're not gung-ho enough to be Angie's team, and we're not relentless enough to be Brendan's. We're half pregnant and half ugly. Every now and again, we look like one or the other, but by and large, we're stuck in the middle, going nowhere at present. What do you think about that, Matthew? Is that where we are? Are we nothing? All much of a nothingness.
I think the problem is, like, if I was being totally honest, we've not, I don't think, genuinely played well in a game this season. I think, possibly with the exception of Aberdeen, although, I mean, if you win 6, you can't complain if you win by 6. Clearly, you've been the dominant team, clearly been the best. I think a lot of that was slightly masked by the fact, Aberdeen collapsed in injury time.
Yeah, they were on.
Don't get me wrong, 3-0 would still been a good score, but I think 6-0 implies that we dominated that game in a way that I'm not convinced that we did. We were obviously the better team without perhaps the way that 6 makes it look. And I think that's been the problem. I mean, I saw one. I don't know if it was a newspaper headline or something, but I saw one thing online, and I thought it described the situation perfectly, where it was talking about Rodgers, and it talked about Rodgers' whack-a-mole selection policy. This idea of, it's not obvious what the plan is.
Mm-hmm.
It just sort of seems, especially a lot of the time with substitutions, it just sort of feels a bit like, right, it's not going well, so if I just change it, maybe it will go better. As was said earlier, we've got better players on average. Hence, if the ones we've got aren't playing well, if we just change it, things are going to be fine. And clearly, especially at going to Rugby Park, a place we've, struggled over the years, that's really not the place to be doing it. And I think Sunday wasn't just infuriating, but it was more, in many ways, predictable. I think we've had this malaise for the last few weeks where we've not really played well. I think the difference I thought on Sunday, which is actually very similar to Motherwell and to St Johnstone, as against even Hibs last week and Aberdeen, I think if we don't score early, we're in a lot of trouble in games, because I think teams realise that if we score early, I mean, that was really the difference against Aberdeen and Hibs. You score early, and instantly the game plan of let's just sit back completely goes out the window, and it disrupts people. Whereas, Motherwell, St Johnstone, we obviously didn't score at all against St Johnstone in terms of the at Parkhead earlier in the season. If you don't score, we begin to sort of think, well, where's it coming from? I mean, I think the weird thing is, I suppose this is true of football. If you played, it's a bit like, we beat Barcelona famously in 2012. Now, if you played that game again 100 times, you probably lose 99 of them. Sunday's fairly similar. I thought in the first half, we weren't great. I mean, I don't think we were playing well, but we actually had a lot of chances that we really should have done better in. Quite a lot of shots that were over the bar that at the very least you had to be making the keeper work. Now, I think it's one of those things where if you score any one of them, the dynamic really changes. But instead, we're not as far ahead as we hoped we were going to be. And you were, in some ways, you were just waiting. I mean, I just sort of felt a bit like, was mentioned, you do expect teams are always going to have a spell in the game. But I just sort of felt, you're like, when is this going to break? Because there didn't ever seem to be a bit of respite. There didn't ever in that second half seem to be a spell where you went, right, that's it. Normal services resumed. We're back on top. It just felt a bit like, in some ways, lambs to the slaughter. I suppose a bit like the way a lot of teams have felt over the years when they've come to Celtic Park. We just had no idea how to do it. Kilmarnock were angrier. They were willing to chase down balls. They were just physically stronger on the ball. I just thought the number of times that we've got knocked off the ball, not in a foul sense.
They bullied us, didn't they?
Absolutely. Bullied is exactly the word, and not in a way that they did something wrong, but just in a way that we just seemed incapable of showing any fight. If I was being reasonable, the older I get, the more reasonable I think sometimes I get. But if I was being reasonable, you're probably missing, it's a bit like what you're saying, you're almost missing 5, 6 first-team players from last year. You've lost Starfelt. You've lost Jota. Moy, towards the end, was increasingly the first-choice midfielder. So there's 3 people that have completely left the club. Just now, well, you had no Carter Vickers on Sunday. You've obviously got Maeda out. You've got Hitati out. You've got Abada out. Now, there is 7 players that if they were fit or still at the club, they would be in. So I think there is a certain aspect where you do have to slightly acknowledge that there has been issues of injuries and that. But this is what then flags up what was a dreadful summer of transfers, because we lost all these people.
That's exactly what I've wrote.
That's where we're coming to.
Yeah, but we lost all these people, and again, it's the whack-a-mole thing. It just feels like the scouting thing over the summer was, see if we go out and sign 10 players, probably 3 or 4 of them will be pretty good, rather than having people. I mean, Nat Phillips, God love him, but I mean, he's making me yearn for the days of Shane Duffy. I mean, if you really go back, he's making me yearn for the days of Willie Gardner. But you know,
Desi, what are you thinking there?
Right, no, well, again, I was liking what Matthew said, because it echoed exactly what I said on Sunday to Monty. I said it all looks like a case of let's just hope for the best. There's no explanation for us to get to the stage of a side on the pitch ending up with folk comparing this to the COVID season, right? And that's exactly. So I've got the headline here for the agenda: from Treble to Trouble. It's a case of history repeating itself. We've got last-minute loans from the EPL who are hopeless. We're playing players who shouldn't be on the park, and there's no any explanation. How did we manage to sign 9 players and then an emergency loan in the summer, and not one of them were first-choice players? How can that possibly be a signing policy of no signing one first-team player? I mean, I'd love to hear somebody explain. I mean, nobody can see this, but Hector's nodding, but we're all nodding as in we're perplexed. We don't know, like, there's no an answer. It's like one of the great riddles. How did we manage to have a signing policy like that?
This isn't just Sunday's result. That's brought it to the forefront, obviously. But this is a discussion we've had in many podcasts. You're, no doubt, Matthew will be the same. You go to games or talk to friends or whatever about it. We're still scratching our head from when the transfer window closed, and we think back and go, hold on, who did we actually buy again, right? But young.
Brendan Rodgers came in on June the 19th. I mean, like, and the window closed in September the 1st.
Yeah, I'm
no, that's what I'm saying. So
by the way, and then the team get back together again. I think the first week in July, blah blah blah. So since the start of July, and we mentioned this in previous podcasts, it was very, very low key. Probably because him coming back was a shock to the system for everyone at the time, right? Remember, they went to Portugal for a week behind closed doors, very few closed doors. The first interviews they did was in Japan, wasn't it? And even then, it was kind of limited media. So in effect, it wasn't. He says, "Well, look at the squad, look at the players," which is fair enough. But you look at the players that were brought in, and most of them were no doubt lined up as you would tend to do before we brought them in. So you had Yang, you had Home, Bernardo's probably later one on loan, Tillio, Kwon, Palmer came in at the last minute. Lagerbielke came in via his agent, who was Starfield's agent. Starfield gets sold to Celta Vigo. His agent goes, "Oh, I've got a player, Swedish guy doing really well, Lagerbielke, and he may be good. I'm not going to write the guy off just yet." And Naroki, who was unfortunate, in front of Rugby Park, he got his bad injury, didn't he, down there at the start of the season, which put him out for a couple of. But the bit that frustrates me as much as anything is, we've all known, even go back to Angie's time, the last 2 years, what we needed to push on was a bit more physical presence to go with the pace, with that bit of nous on the pitch, a bit of experience, just to help these other guys on. And Rodgers many times has said this: physical presence and a little bit more of experience to help bring the younger guys on. Here we are now, a week or so before Christmas time, and we're looking at the January window in 2 weeks' time, see, to be honest with you, I've got zero confidence. Those running the club get 2 or 3 of the deals done that we need. Bit of experience, bit of skill, bit of presence to push us on. I've got zero confidence in it, and that's the really frustrating thing. Where Celtic, what is it? End of June, £72 million cash sitting in the bank, which won't count the monies from the past few months, which will include the Champions League revenue coming in. So we might have the best part of £90+ million cash end of this month bank, and doing as we always do, as the board always do, not the fans, the board always do. We'll sit and hum and haw, and probably the 31st of January we'll get somebody in loan from the EPL who's not getting a game.
Yeah, somebody will go to Leicester and find somebody in Leicester reserves. But as Matthew mentioned there, like we lost Starfelt, Jota and Moy. That's a 32-year-old, a 28-year-old and a 24-year-old. And we've replaced them with all these young, inexperienced guys needing to prove each other. Like Moy, the contribution that Aaron Moy to Celtic last season was vast when you actually look back at it. I mean, like watching games, he was involved in 4 goals in one game. No, like an actual, you could, like, for a professional footballer who fitted perfectly the system. And as you say, Hector, I don't know if you can guarantee that Mark Lawwell's going to go out and get the players that Brendan's identified. So my question, Matthew, to you is the classic quote: "Those who won't learn from history are deemed to repeat it." Are we really in that scenario whereby we're clutching at straws, or will Rodgers pull out a classic Ange and actually give us 3 players like Maeda and Hatate, and actually who'll make a sudden difference straight away in January?
Well, this is why I write about history rather than try and predict the future. But,
come on, Mystic Matthew.
No, I thought, and to sort of to answer this, I thought the thing that surprised me in the summer was when Rodgers came in, I thought there would be one, at least, Scott Sinclair level signing. And what I mean by that is, when Rodgers first spell, the Scott Sinclair signing was a real statement of intent. We got a big name manager. Here was a big name player, a guy that we knew. And obviously he was a fantastic signing. He was a really, really great player for the club. And I thought there would be at least one like that. I thought, like, Rodgers has come back. They must have dangled something in front to persuade him to return. We must be getting at least a couple of people on that level, that are really going to strengthen us, help us in the Champions League. And the more you waited, we signed numerically a lot of people, but there was never, and I don't think, not one fan I ever spoke to ever went, "Oh, this is going to be, what a signing this is." Whether we get, now, I had the slight theory, I know what you mean about he came in mid-June, that if we're being completely honest though, Brendan Rodgers, when he was away from Celtic, was not scouting the 3 to 5 million market in the belief that he was coming back to Celtic Park one day. And I had it in my head, look, he's going to want to come in, he's going to want to see the team, he's going to want to see us in actual games, not just training and all the rest of it, which struck me as well. That's August. He's not going to get a chance to see us in proper games for August. And it did occur to me that we might not make signings at that point, because he might take the view, Celtic have just won a treble, they're clearly the best team, I'm going to save some of this money until I've had a chance to see the team, we'll have enough to see us to January into the summer. That is the optimistic part of me, is what I hope. In terms of what's going to happen in January, I mean, I don't know, it's very difficult to sign players in January. We have had some good windows in the past. It's a running joke amongst my friends. If you know where to look, I mean, one of my all-time, certainly of this century, one of my absolute favourite signings, absolutely still love him, is Barry Robson. I just think Barry Robson was the perfect example of a January signing. Brought him in, won us the league that season. Absolutely won us the league. Nothing will ever convince me. You could have taken any player out of that team except him, I think, and we might have still won the league. You couldn't have taken him. So we have in the past shown that we can go and get big players, people that can actually make a significant difference. The hope's got to be that that's what we do. I think, is there a worry that, we'll end up with the usual, a couple of last-minute EPL loans? That's harder to tell. I think the one thing is, right, we've got a title race, but if we're being sensible, the reality is we're top of the league just now. And we're not just top of the league in the sense of until Rangers play their game in hand. We're top of the league even if they win their game in hand. So in some ways, to talk about a crisis maybe this is a good crisis to be in. We talk, maybe every other club in Scotland's going, God, I wish I was top of the league with points to spare and tens of millions in the bank in crisis. We're in a strong position. We're maybe not in a strong position as we were 3 weeks ago, but we're still in the best position, certainly from a league perspective in Scotland. If we can get to the win, I think the big thing is, as long as by the winter break, we haven't lost any further ground. We need to win all our league games, ideally beating them as well on the 30th. If we do that, I think there'll be an element of breathing then. We can hopefully get some people back injury. We can hopefully bring in a couple of signings that are actually first-team players. I think if we do all that, by the end of the year, we'll be fine. But the question is whether we actually do that.
Yeah. One of the things that was on my mind, and Hector kind of touched a wee bit when he was asking me about what do I think. One of my concerns is that we are relying on people come back from injury. The only player that's really had any form before they get injured was Maeda. We've not seen Abada in a Rodgers team really. Hatate was both sides of the coin really. First of all, it seemed Brendan didn't really like him that much. Then he came in and then he was out. So I don't know if they players, Angie's great players, are still going to fit into a Brendan team, because you can't actually see what the Brendan team is yet. You know what I mean? It's just that horseshoe of boredom, going out to the left, going into the middle, going out to the right, come into the middle, going out to the left. And like I had a look today, and it was just I know we're not into stats whatsoever, but just a random last 4 games compared to last season, around about the same time, 4 games. And Angie's average possession on a game was 80%. Rodgers' average possession is 70%. And Rodgers is a manager obsessed with possession of football. So I don't know if he's getting his lessons are getting through to the players, and therefore is it a case of we need to get different players in, or are the players is it going to suddenly click and then they will get it? Because even under Ange, we did see a falter at the start, but you could see what was coming down the line. There was signs of, well, if that clicks and that clicks, they'll suddenly be flying. Sure enough, they did. But Rodgers, they haven't won 3 games in a row, which was really incredible. Sorry.
Just in terms of balance, but remember, right?
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of this with Ange this and Ange that, but let's be. We're no apples with apples here. We mentioned the players that have been out or were sold. Mm-hmm. Right. If we'd have had Maeda, Hatate, Abada, Jota, Moy, I think we see a very different Celtic. The issue is that they've not been replaced. So we've now got a massive gap. There's no squad depth. There's zero squad depth whatsoever. We've got all these young guys, or Mikey Johnson, or James Forrest, who've been great. James Forrest a great 7 at Celtic. There's now James Forrest will probably start tomorrow night. It's either James Forrest or Mikey Johnson's going to start. Just let that sink in, right? The other thing with Ange is a 97th minute winner away to Ross County, Jackie Makis 95th minute winner at McDiarmid Park. We had moments with him as well. All I would say is that I think the issue is we've no squad depth. Some of our key players are missing, and we didn't strengthen the squad at all with first team players this summer. And if that's not addressed almost immediately in January, well, the good news is we've got 2 or 3 weeks breathing space before the kind of first competitive game again. Then it just asks the question: why is Rodgers here?
Well, I've been making notes, compare and contrast, for example, and I'm not.
Pause there. Can't hear you. You're frozen. That's the most sense he's made all night, Matthew. just so you know. He's frozen. So while we're waiting for Desi to come back, you laid a lot of things out there, Matthew, in terms of what if scenarios. What's your head and your gut telling you about January?
I think the board will know, as well. I suppose, if we're being honest, right, it's very tempting. I think sometimes.
Well, I'm not here to talk about Ange, right?
You froze for about 30 seconds there, Desi.
Oh, that was the matter. I was wondering.
We couldn't hear you at all.
Right. No, you carry on. I was just about to say, compare and contrast, football style, rapport, overall enthusiasm, and that's including all of the club. And then even things like press conferences, it's chalk and cheese for what it was last year. How did that club go from being one extreme to the other? It just bemuses me. I just don't understand how it descends in a year like that.
I think a lot of these things come down to wider context. Ange came in, and remember at the start, was not popular instantly. I mean, you only have to think for the first 2 or 3 months where a lot of Celtic support. I mean, clearly the wider the media in Scotland, but even a lot of Celtic supporters were very, very angry at this. We all remember that Postecoglou and all the rest of it. All these headlines. So I think the difference was Ange won people around. Last minute winner. People like last minute winners. Last minute winners are brilliant. The only problem of last minute winners are you have to play very close to the edge of not getting a last minute winner. You can't win 4-0 and have the excitement of a last minute winner. And Ange, when he came in, after he began to turn it around, I think there was a recognition. Here's a guy. I think fans like the idea in some ways of sort of backing an underdog. And so when Ange coming in, being sort of written off, and yet beginning to turn it around, beginning to play a lot more exciting football, I think that was where people began to really buy in. Ange was just great. The reality was, on a human level, Ange was just an incredibly nice guy. I mean, as a total aside, I remember one day taking my daughter to the game, and after we waited outside, like after the game, to try and get some autographs and pictures and all the rest of it. And the players, it was when they were still doing some of the COVID restrictions, so you couldn't actually go up to the players. They were putting, the sort of the tunnels or the fencing up. And most of the players just went straight up. And Ange came out, and he must have stood for an hour. He walked up one side and then up the other, and then he did it. Nobody left without getting a photo with this guy. And this was a guy that seemed to get it. And I think people really liked that. Brendan Rodgers, on the other hand, is just a genuinely different personality. There's just, he's just not the same type of person. He also has this hurdle of, that split in the support of, because of the way he left before. There's a lot of fans quite happy to see him back, clearly an experienced manager, and there's obviously a lot of people that just weren't happy. And I think this was always the potential that if, you only have to see it. People started singing his name a few weeks ago when we were 8 points clear. And then we've had a wobble, we've drawn at home, we've lost at the weekend, and suddenly there's the nervousness. I think you have to make the decision. This is a massively experienced manager who knows just as well as we do what the problems are. He's not watching this thinking, I wonder what the solutions are. He's more experienced than most people watching it. I'm hoping that what that means is that he's pushing the board, that we do have to get 1 or 2 at least first team players in January. Now, whether that happens or not is that we don't. And I think that's where the board will take legitimate criticism. If we don't win the league this year, if we don't strengthen in January when we clearly need to with actual experience, then I think when there's a fan fury at the end of the season, and I think if we miss out on more Champions League money, I think you'll quite legitimately lay the blame. And I'm not convinced I would give it entirely to Rodgers. I think it goes elsewhere.
Again, you're totally right, but sadly for Rodgers, it will be him in the immediate firing line. Right, so talk about firing lines. Hector, does Lawwell Senior have to tell Lawwell Junior to get his finger out because he's on the Santa's naughty list so far this year?
That's the thing, that's right. We're all old enough to know Peter Law is the club chairman. Right, now, the club chairman has, bear with me here, there's a caveat with this, club chairman has zero day-to-day involvement with running the football club. He's almost a figurehead who turns up at AGMs, etc. Michael Nicholson's the guy that runs the business day-to-day. Obviously Dermot Desmond and his son are the de facto power at Celtic. But the issue that we Celtic fans have is that Peter Law being there as chief exec for so long, way longer than normal in any business, then disappearing for a short period of time, then coming back as chairman, which is, I would say it's unique, but it is very rare for that to happen. And then lo and behold, his son is heading up the scouting network. And we all know about the history with Law and Brendan Rodgers having the fallout when Law was the chief exec. So it creates this, I'm not making this up, it creates that strange fucking dynamic within the club. right now when it shouldn't be. Now, Mark Lawwell's getting a bit of criticism just now, and I've heard one or two things online. You get it. People are angry and upset just now. But Mark Lawwell he's got good experience working for the City Group, had the relationship with Ange before Ange came to Celtic. He's getting a lot of the blame just now for who's been brought in. But I don't think for a second Mark Lawwell is the guy who signs off the transfer fees and the players' contracts. I think that goes way above Mark Lawwell's pay grade, and we go to Chief Financial Officer and we go to Michael Nicholson, Desi, to sign that off. And for me, it was clear Rodgers wanted, he mentioned this several times, this wasn't just after the window closing, there was 3 or 4 experienced players to come in to help this younger group of players who may or may not become good players that can sell on in the future. And the fact that didn't happen is the biggest question in my head about why it wasn't done with all that cash in the bank. And I just don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And then Matthew, we're now at the position whereby Rodgers has constantly talked about trimming the squad, raising the quality. But how do you get rid of the quantity? Who's wanting the players? How do we get rid of 14 duds and replace them with 4 stars? And that sort of way, do we trust Mark Lawwell can do that?
Well, again, as I say, I think Rodgers is right. There's no question that certain parts of the squad, especially, we just have gluts of players. Without, I think especially, it's not even just the fact that there's certain parts of the squad where we've got an excess amount of players. We've got lots of parts of the squad where we've got the same player and repeated. What do we really need? I mean, personally, I can only speak for myself, but what you really needed, especially if you were going to show European progress, what we've been crying out for a while is a sort of, to me, a Wanyama-style midfielder. We need someone that can actually dominate, a bit of experience, but is strong, can dominate, would allow McGregor a bit more, for example, flexibility. To me, that's one of the things that I would have liked to see it. We don't have that anywhere in the team. We have, if you look at Bernardo, if you look at Turnbull, if you look at O'Reilly, these are all similar types of players. There's none. It's not so much that we've got a glut of players, but they can all do different jobs. It's that we've got a lot of players that are very, very similar, and in certain positions, none of which are especially standing out. If you look on the wings, I completely agree with the point that was made earlier. I think Maeda's a fantastic player. I think the fact that, people that moan about him are maybe seeing now just what you're losing by not having him in your team. But if you look on the wings, just now, Mikey Johnson, God love him, but I've never taken to Mikey Johnson. I remember when first time round, going back to I remember especially the 2019 final and people getting really excited because Mikey Johnson's in the team, and I just didn't understand it, and I still don't. Johnson, Forrest, Yang, even, and I know Palmer for a while was getting bummed up, but Palmer has potential, but I don't look at him yet and go, that's a guy that's really come in and dominated in a way that, say, Jota did. Now, whether that's down to the style the manager's trying to play or whether that's just down to the quality, I don't know. But, I think this is really the problem we've got. There are at least 10 players you could comfortably lose, but quite how you lose them without frankly, just paying them off, which I suspect we're not going to do, is anyone's guess. And I just don't see it happening. I think the best we can hope for is maybe one experienced loan and one permanent experience in January. I think that might make a difference. But again, who knows what the club can actually access.
So, Hector, do we just go full out for the PR victory and go and bring Jota back? And that makes everyone happy, do you think?
Oh, I think we'd all be delighted. It would just be a PR victory. We'd bring back an absolute quality football player who would bring so much to that starting 11. Whether that happens or not.
Yeah, this issue I've got here is PR versus PL, i.e. a certain person, a certain. So.
And again, I know this Peter Law thing, right? But as the chairman, he's the chairman. If he's got any more power than opening up an AGM or writing some words round about the interim accounts as a club chairman, it's wrong and shouldn't be the case. I suppose what's in a lot of people's heads is not that long ago when he was chief exec, I think Michael Nicholson reported to him. There's understandable some fans have got a reservation, and I'm no doubt, I'm not stupid, I'm probably one of them. But he shouldn't be involved in day-to-day running, Desi. It would be Michael Nicholson, the chief financial officer who signs off the contracts and the spend, and ultimately, for the big decisions, i.e. the manager, it's big Dermy boy over the water, isn't it? He'll pick up the phone Brendan and say, guys, forget this due diligence and talk to 4 or 5 managers. I want Brendan Rodgers. So, back to Matthew raised the point. The fact that Dermot Desmond instigated that conversation, phoned up Rodgers, sent off Nicholson and the financial guy over to Mallorca to talk to him and get the contract done. There has to be an agreement in place, Desi. Common sense tells you Rodgers isn't coming back to coach Yang, Home, Tillio, Kwon, and others. He's come back knowing Celtic's cash-rich club. They've got a fortune in money. There's Champions League football. He's got a few quid to spend. And when I say a few quid, we're talking about 20 to 25 million pounds to spend on a few players.
Right. That's a very good point. So what I've got here is this Miovski ... Do you go out and buy him? Matthew.
Sorry, Matthew, you go first.
No, you go, right. Or I've got Miovski, or are we back to the old signing scope of what's in your own backyard rather than the wider scope, the Van Hooijdonks, juniors, etc.?
I think if you look at some of the signings we've made in recent times, so I know this is going back a few years, but if you think of the money that we spent on Ayeti, if you had a spare 5 million just now, Ayeti sounds more exciting to people because at the end of the day, it's a foreign name coming from a different country, and that's always going to be the thing that gets people excited. I think Miovski is clearly a good player. He can clearly score in Scotland, and I think if the money was right, and I'm not convinced it is, I think this is where the problem comes. If he was available in the 2 to 3 million bracket, then actually there probably is a case for saying, what's the point in going and taking a risk on someone in a similar financial bracket from another country that comes here and possibly fails when we've got a guy that we know with fewer chances in a game can score in Scotland. So I'm not against signing for this. No one's suggesting that that's going to make him a Champions League striker, but it's all relative. Scott McDonald did well in Europe. Gary Hooper did well in Europe. And none of these, these weren't massive names. So I think if your scouting's right, I think if they look at Miovski and think he could actually offer something, personally, I wouldn't be against it. I think the only issue is, I think if you're Aberdeen, I think if you look at the length of contract the boys got, it depends, especially I think what happens on Sunday, whether they win the cup. I think if you're Aberdeen, you're very, very loath to sell him to Celtic unless your fans can be justified by this is silly money. I think ironically, in many ways, I think Aberdeen winning on Sunday would make it more likely that we'd sign him, because I think there's an element where they could gamble that the fans will just be happy to have a trophy. Whereas I think if they were to lose on Sunday, I think short of selling him to us for about 6 million, I think Aberdeen supporters would be furious, and I just don't see them doing it. And whether we're prepared in Scotland, in fact, there's not a debate. There's no prospect we're willing to spend 5 million on a Scottish player. So I think if he was somehow available for free, absolutely, I think he would be somebody you would want to sign. I'm sceptical, though, that the money Aberdeen will want for him is something we would spend.
Yeah. Hector, I await your WhatsApps in the first week of January when we discover that Peter Lawwell is in negotiations with Aberdeen, who are also in negotiations with Leeds United and some other English team, and sure enough it will be another John McGinn affair. Right. So I'll just finish in respect to that with the last of Monty's thoughts here. 3 windows. They really have to let Brendan get his own players in starting this January. Otherwise he'll walk and you wouldn't blame him. Why can't I disassociate Lawwell every time we fuck up? 2 years of clarity, progression and unity. Then he turns up again and now we're back to angst, peggish pure jives at the Huns at AGMs, project players starting and the concept of old firm title races now firmly back on. Tory cunts, right? So that is Monty's thoughts, right? So before we wrap up, I've got a Christmas quiz for us. Hector, do you want to go first or second?
Anyone.
Okay, I'll let you go first, seeing as Matthew's our guest. It's just a short quiz, this one. End of year quiz for 2023. Hector, who scored our first goal of 2023? And there will be bonus points available, Matthew. No pressure. Matthew does an excellent quiz. Who scored our first goal of...
So it's not this season, it's back in January you're talking about?
It's the whole year, the calendar year. Who scored our first goal of 2023?
They had the winter break, didn't they?
Just be careful you don't get anything away here, remember. 2023, who scored our first goal?
Is it usually Scottish Cup the first year after winter break? Scottish Cup.
Again, don't forget, I compiled this quiz, so it could be wrong.
Did we play more? Was it more?
You will notice, Matthew, Hector is stalling for time here.
I'm not Googling anything. I'm not Googling anything.
His son is at the other side of the camera, Googling.
I think it was a game. I think we won. Was it 4 or 5-0? Was it?
I need a name. Okay, for a bonus point, Matthew, any idea?
Did we not play Rangers the first game?
I can't give you any clues. I need a name.
I'm torn between. I'm torn between.
As you're a guest, I'll give you a hint. You may be right.
Kyogo's the obvious one, so I'm going to go for Maeda.
Correct, Maeda in 5 minutes against the Huns. Correct, well done. Matthew storms into a 1-0 lead. So,
that might be it. I'm hopeless on modern games.
This is all history stuff, by the way. He should win.
Don't worry, it's Christmas. Okay, Matthew, your question. Who scored both our first home goal of 2023 and our last goal against the Huns at home in the calendar year? Same player. First home goal of 2023 and our last goal versus the Huns at home.
Oh, now you're asking. I'm struggling. I'm trying to think who last. If it's the last scored against Rangers.
Don't forget, you don't want to get any clues away to Hector. He's ready to pounce there. I can see him. He's on Google.com. I wish I had the countdown music ready here.
Jota.
Correct. Jota versus Kilmarnock on the 7th of January, 2-0. And then Jota 3-2 at home for the 3-2 game.
I wouldn't have remembered. I didn't remember the first goal, but I was thinking back to who'd scored against Rangers. That was the only one I could think of. But I wouldn't have got the Kilmarnock one.
Well done. Okay, next question to Hector. Hector, which classy player scored in our last league game of last season in a 5-0 win versus Aberdeen before exiting the club? Take your time. This is one for the listeners. Take your time.
So we beat Aberdeen, was it 5-0?
Yes, 5-0.
And who scored the last? Is it the last goal in the 5-0?
Which classy player scored in our last league game of last season in a 5-0 win before exiting the club? Especially for you, come on. Especially for you, come on. Which classy player? Which classy player? Come on. Who do you feel was one of the classiest players for Celtic in the last few seasons? It has been mentioned tonight already.
Yeah, no more clues. I know this one.
Pressure. Come on, Hector.
Classy.
One of your favourite players.
I don't know. Logic, I don't know.
Okay. Tell him, Matthew.
Aaron Moy.
Carl Starfelt.
He's a diddy as well.
Hector hated him.
Oh, don't hate anyone.
He's literally Greg Taylor's trying to fill the void that Carl Starfelt left in Hector's empty heart.
Two diddies left side of the fence.
Right, here we go. And these were quiz questions from Monty, who's not here, so we'll let Matthew take the first one. Matthew, What was our record-breaking pre-tax profit announcement in September 2023? 20 million, 40 million, 60 million?
I'm not actually sure. 60?
Hector?
40.
Well done, Hector's back in the game. He's back in the game.
God bless you.
Okay, Hector, you ready? The second question for yourself. How much of a percentage pay rise did Hector's very good Madrid friend Brian Wilson get this year as a non-executive director of Celtic? 22%, 42%, 62%.
They get a lot, do they? But however, the way you've pitched the question, I'm going to go for 62%.
Correct. His wages are up to 40 grand. So it's now 3-2, I believe. Is it 3-2 or 2-2?
That's 2-2, I think.
2-2 with the final question. And sadly, sorry, Hector, but this last question is for Matthew, and it's a historical one, and I think it's a stick one. It's a classic.
Is the answer Jimmy McGrory?
No, Hector stole it in. Right, Matthew, for the title for the 2023 E-Tim's Christmas Quiz champion, which Lisbon Lions dad captain Rangers?
Ronnie Simpson.
Well done, there's a winner. We've got a winner. Congratulations. Matthew Marr wins the inaugural E-Tim's Christmas Quiz 2023. Right, so Matthew, before we finish, just a last plug for yourself. So what's the book called? It's available at all good Celtic superstores. What's it called?
It is indeed. So it's called The Bold Boys, glory to their name. And it's the story of Celtic's first ever league title, which was 130 years ago this year. So as you say, it's available in all the Celtic shops. You can get it online from the Celtic shops and also from Celtic Star Books. It's also on Amazon for people that use that, including Kindle. So there's loads of places you can get it. So hopefully there's still time to get it in time for Christmas. Just what everybody wants to wake up to on Christmas morning.
Perfect. So please do search out Matthew's book and look out for Matthew online, Hail Hail History. So when's the tour starting back up? That being the spring?
The tours that once the weather gets a bit better, but as I say, I'm going to be doing a mixture of I've got the City Centre tour planned, I've got some of the match day tours planned, so we'll be starting when I think the weather's going to brighten up a wee bit. I've been toying with, there's a marginal chance I'm going to risk a walk around the south side.
Well, welcome. Anytime you want to come to the sunny side of the river, I'm more than welcome.
It's not Glasgow. The south of the river's not Glasgow.
Well, it's a fix. It's a fix, Hector. That's how you lost. So you and I are on the good side of the river, Matthew. We're quoted. We're all right.
Who's two in the Huns? South of the river. That's right.
Tony Glenn's finest. That's us sorted. Yes. So yeah, before we forget, I'd just like to give a final plug to everyone to please, if you get a chance, listen out for the Axon Big Weekender. We may be on it. I don't know if anyone's available yet. And also, of course, please support your local food bank if you can over this very hard period. And this is the last for me to just say thank you very much, Hector.
Thanks, guys. Enjoyed that.
And a very special thank you to Matthew Marr from Hail Hail History. Thank you, Matthew. Thanks for coming.
Thanks very much for having me.
Excellent, folks. So, folks, we'll just leave it with a special Christmas farewell to Shane McGowan. Thanks very much. Have a great Christmas. My name's Desmond. Good night. Merry Christmas.
Sure, it's a grand old scene to play for. Sure, it's a grand old scene these days. And when you hear its history, it's enough to make your heart grow sad. God bless them, we don't care if we win, lose or draw. What the hell do we care? Because we only know that there's gonna be a show, and the Glasgow Celtic will be there. Sure, it's the best damn team in Scotland, and the players all are grand. We support the Celtic, cause they're the finest in the land. We love them, we'll be there to give the boys a cheer. When the green flag flies, and it cheers us up, well we know the Scottish Cup is coming home to rest of paradise. gonna be a show when the Glasgow Celtic will be there.